They say evil doesn't just appear in the dark. Sometimes it walks quietly into the places we feel safest. For one family, that place was Cabin 28 in a small forgotten town called Keddie, hidden deep in the mountains of Northern California. In the early 1980s, Keddie was the kind of place people drove through and forgot. A cluster of cheap cabins once used as summer rentals, now turned into low-income housing. A single dirt road wound through tall pine trees. The sound of the Feather River nearby was constant, a soft murmur in the distance. To outsiders, it seemed peaceful. To those who lived there, it was isolation. April 11th, 1981. The Sharp family was settling in for the night. Glenna Sue Sharp, a mother of 5, had moved to Keddie just a year before. After escaping an abusive marriage, she wanted a fresh start, a quiet life in Cabin 28 with her children, John, Sheila, Tina, Ricky, and Greg. That night seemed ordinary. The children watched TV with their friends. The younger boys went to bed early. Sheila, the eldest daughter, decided to spend the night next door with a friend. It would be the decision that saved her life. No one knew that by sunrise the cabin would be silent, that the Sharp family would never wake again. Sometime after midnight, horror crept into Cabin 28. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever came inside was either let in or already knew how to get in. The next morning, Sheila returned home around 8 a.m. The cabin door was slightly open. She stepped inside and froze. The living room was drenched in blood. Her brother John, 15 years old, and his friend Dana, 17, lay lifeless on the floor. Their bodies were tied with electrical cords. Their faces were beaten beyond recognition. Nearby, her mother Sue was found lying by the couch, partially covered with a yellow blanket. She had been bound, gagged, and stabbed repeatedly. The walls, the furniture, the carpet, all splattered with blood. It wasn't just murder, it was rage. In the boys' bedroom, the 2 youngest sons, Ricky and Greg, were still asleep, unharmed. And in the next room, the neighbor's 12-year-old boy who'd spent the night there was also untouched. None of them had heard a thing, but there was something else missing. Tina, the 12-year-old daughter, was gone. Her bed was empty. In the quiet town of Keddie, something terrible had happened, something no one could explain. And as the day went on, it became clear. This was not the work of a stranger who came and left in a hurry. It was something much darker. Because whoever entered Cabin 28 that night seemed to know exactly what they were doing. By the afternoon of April 12, 1981, the little town of Keddie was no longer silent. Sheriff's cars and deputies crowded the narrow dirt road. Neighbors stood outside their cabins, whispering. No one could understand how something like this could happen. Not here, in this forgotten mountain town. Inside Cabin 28, investigators were met with a scene so violent that even hardened officers struggled to speak. Blood covered nearly every surface of the living room. The ceiling, the furniture, the walls, all painted in red. It looked like the killers had stayed for a while. Cigarette butts, empty beer cans, and a bloody fingerprint was left behind. There were 3 different weapons used, a hammer, a knife, and another sharp blade, possibly a hunting knife. And yet, despite all the evidence, the crime scene felt strangely staged. The front door was unlocked, the phone had been taken off the hook and the cord cut. The drapes were closed. Whoever had done this seemed calm, deliberate. And the biggest question of all remained, where was Tina? When the sheriff asked the surviving children what they'd seen, their answers were haunting. They'd slept through the entire thing. Even as their mother and brother were murdered just feet away, none of them woke up. Some said it was fear. Others said it was the thick wooden walls of the cabin. But there were rumors, too, of something else. One neighbor later told police she'd seen a dim light moving through the trees late that night, like someone carrying a lantern. Another claimed she heard muffled voices outside around 2 a.m., men arguing, then silence. Still, the investigation stumbled. Evidence was misplaced. The scene was never sealed properly. Curious townsfolk wandered through the cabin before it was secured, contaminating potential fingerprints and footprints. And as word spread, the story began to twist. People started whispering about Tina. Some said they'd seen her with strangers in a pickup truck the next morning. Others claimed she'd been taken into the woods. A few even whispered that the killers had kept her alive for a while. Days turned into weeks. The police followed dozens of leads, but none of them led anywhere. Then, something unusual happened. A man called the sheriff's office anonymously. His voice was calm, almost emotionless. He said he knew where Tina was. The dispatcher recorded the call, but for some reason, it was never followed up on. The tape was filed away and forgotten. Meanwhile, Keddie began to rot. Residents moved away. Cabins were abandoned. Locals said the entire place felt cursed. At night, the wind howled through the empty resort, rattling the windows of Cabin 28. People claimed to see shadows moving inside, even though it had long been sealed shut. Rumors spread, whispers of a haunting. But whether haunted or not, the horror of what happened there lingered, and no one could forget the missing girl. Then, 3 years later, a shocking discovery changed everything. In 1984, a man collecting cans near Feather Falls, about 100 miles from Keddie, stumbled upon something in the woods, a human skull. Next to it were tiny fragments of clothing. Forensic tests later confirmed what everyone feared. It was Tina Sharp. Her remains were found miles away, deep in the forest. How she got there, who took her, and why, remain questions with no answers. And from that moment on, the case was no longer just a family tragedy. It was a mystery drenched in silence, sealed in blood, and forever tied to a cabin that the forest itself seemed to reject. After Tina's remains were found in 1984, the Keddie case shifted from a tragedy to a haunting puzzle that refused to fade. For years, local authorities had no answers. The evidence was scattered, contaminated, and badly handled. But beneath the surface of this small mountain town, secrets were waiting to crawl out. From the very beginning, detectives had focused on two men, both familiar faces in the neighborhood. One was Marty Smart, a local man who lived just 2 cabins down from the Sharps. The other was John Bo Bubede, a drifter and former convict who had recently moved in with him. Marty was known for his temper. A Vietnam veteran who struggled with anger and alcohol, he had a reputation for being violent when drunk. His wife, Marilyn, happened to be close friends with Sue Sharp, the mother who was found dead in Cabin 28. Some believed that Sue had been advising Marilyn to leave her abusive husband. And that advice may have lit the fuse that ended with blood on the walls. Investigators questioned Marty and Bo shortly after the murders. Both men denied any involvement. Marty said he had been asleep at home, while Bo claimed he didn't even know the Sharp family well enough to have a reason to hurt them. The police had no solid evidence linking them to the crime. But what no one realized then was that behind those denials, cracks were already forming. Years later, it would come to light that Marty had actually written a letter to his wife not long after the murders. In that letter, he confessed, "I've paid the price for your love, and now I've killed 4 people for nothing." The letter was never handed over to police until decades later, long after Marty had died. Even more disturbing, one of Marty's own therapists later told investigators that he had admitted to the murders during a counseling session. But because of patient confidentiality, it had never been shared at the time. Then came another revelation. A hammer, the same type believed to have been used in the murders, was found in a dried-up pond near the old Keddie site. The rusted handle matched the description of one missing from Marty Smart's tool set. The find reignited the case, but by then, both Marty and Bo were long dead. It seemed that the truth had been buried with them. But something else made the case even stranger. Bo Bubede wasn't just some drifter. He had known ties to organized crime in Chicago. The investigators believed he might have been working as an informant. If true, it could explain why the Keddie case was handled so poorly, and why certain evidence seemed to vanish from the sheriff's office files. Even the anonymous phone call from 1981, the one reporting where Tina's remains were found, was later discovered in a sealed evidence box, never logged or investigated properly. By the early 2000s, Cabin 28 had become a local legend. Ghost hunters, journalists, and curious travelers would sneak into the abandoned building to see it for themselves. Some claimed to hear footsteps upstairs. Others reported hearing a girl's voice whisper their name. Locals said the air inside the cabin felt wrong, heavy, electric, like it was watching you. Even after it was demolished in 2004, the spot where Cabin 28 once stood remained cold and barren. Over 40 years have passed since the murders, yet the mystery of Cabin 28 still lingers. It isn't just an unsolved case, it's a wound that never closed. To this day, questions remain unanswered. Why were some children left alive while others were slaughtered? Why was Tina taken, only to be found miles away in the woods? And perhaps most disturbing of all, how could such a horrific crime happen in a cabin full of people, without a single neighbor hearing more than a muffled scream? Some believe it was human cruelty, nothing supernatural, just the evil that men are capable of. But others aren't so sure. Keddie remains one of the most disturbing and mysterious murder cases in American history. A family destroyed, a child taken. A truth buried beneath years of silence and fear. Cabin 28 may be gone, demolished and erased from the map, but the horror it held still lingers. Some say that evil never truly leaves, it only waits. And in the mountains of Northern California, beneath the whispering pines and shifting fog, it's still waiting.